Your steering wheel starts humming first, a buzz that crawls up through your palms and into your seat until it feels like the whole car is trying to shake itself apart. And the terrifying part is, you are doing 65 on a flat stretch of highway, with nothing wrong that you can see. No potholes, no gravel, no crosswind, just a smooth, violent vibration that gets worse the second you climb even a gentle grade or hold a steady speed in overdrive. Your kids in the back seat ask if something broke, and your stomach drops. Because some part of you already knows what this is before you even pull into a shop. Your transmission is shuddering under load, the exact feeling of driving over a rumble strip, except there is no rumble strip anywhere near you. You flick the radio off like that will somehow help you hear the problem better. You ease off the gas, hoping it magically resolves itself, and instead, the vibration just changes pitch. So you do the responsible thing and take it in, and 40 minutes later, a service advisor at a big chain transmission center slides a written estimate across the counter for $3,500, a full teardown, a complete rebuild, cash or financing, take it or leave it. He uses words like internal damage and clutch failure, like he already knows what he is going to find before anyone has opened anything up, and you are standing there feeling like you just got mugged in broad daylight over a problem that started as nothing more than a slight shake at highway speed. Here's what that service advisor will never volunteer, because saying it out loud would talk him out of a $3,500 ticket. That violent shudder you are feeling almost never means your transmission is dying. It means the fluid inside it has aged past the point where it can do its one job, and there's a $13 tube of concentrated friction modifier sitting on a shelf at literally every parts store in the country that independent fleet mechanics and diesel shops have quietly relied on for years to kill that exact shudder, often before you even finish the drive home from buying it. No teardown, no rebuild, no wrench anywhere near your drivetrain, just a small tube of fluid poured into the same dipstick tube you already used to check your fluid level. This is the part that should make you angry. Dealership networks and corporate transmission chains train their advisors to sell hardware, torque converters, valve bodies, full rebuilds, because that is where the real profit margin lives. A service writer who quietly suggests a $13 bottle of friction modifier before recommending a $3,500 job does not get invited back to sell more rebuilds, so the fluid fix simply never gets mentioned. It is left out on purpose, not because it does not work, but because it works too well and costs too little. This is not one bad advisor at one shady location. This is the training material. Multi-location chains build entire sales scripts around leading with the most expensive diagnosis that technically fits the symptom, because a $13 bottle recommended honestly does not move quarterly numbers the way a full rebuild does. And the tragedy is most of the technicians actually turning the wrenches know exactly what a shudder usually means. They simply are not the ones writing the estimate. If you are done quietly getting priced out of a problem this small, hit subscribe right now and join the Garage Underground, because every single video on this channel exists to hand you the fix the shops would rather you never stumble onto on your own. Let's actually talk about what is happening inside your transmission, because the real explanation is not some mystery locked away in a service bay. It is basic chemistry sitting right there in your fluid. Your automatic transmission fluid is not just oil, it is loaded with friction modifiers, additives whose entire job is to control exactly how the lockup clutch inside your torque converter grips as it engages. When that fluid is fresh, the clutch locks up smoothly because the friction between the plates behaves predictably. As slip speed changes, there is a clean relationship between how hard the clutch holds when it is standing still compared to how hard it holds while it is still sliding a little. But heat cycles and years of driving break those specific additives down long before the base oil itself is actually worn out. Every time that torque converter locks and unlocks under load, it puts the fluid trapped at that clutch interface through intense localized heat, cycle after cycle, thousands of times over the life of the transmission, and friction modifiers are simply not built to survive forever. Under that kind of repeated thermal stress, they get consumed doing their job long before anything else in the fluid gives out. And once those friction modifiers are depleted, the clutch stops gripping smoothly and starts grabbing and releasing in rapid little pulses instead. Stick, slip, dozens of times every second. And that stick-slip cycle traveling through your drivetrain is the actual vibration you feel in the cabin. This is not some fringe theory a YouTube channel invented to sell you a bottle of fluid. General Motors put it in writing themselves. A technical service bulletin from May of 2022 covering 6-speed and 8-speed transmission. Shudder complaints across 11 different vehicle models directly identifies worn out, depleted friction additives as the cause. Engineers call the failure additive depletion, and it shows up across trucks, crossovers, and sedans alike because they are all running the same category of fluid chemistry. A concentrated friction modifier works by reintroducing the exact compounds your fluid already lost, polar molecules that bond directly to the clutch surface, and rebuild a microscopically thin film that restores the correct relationship between static grip and sliding grip. Once that relationship is corrected, the stick-slip cycle stops, and the lockup transition goes back to being smooth and instant. Think about why a worn brake pad squeals. That squeal is the exact same stick-slip physics happening at the pad and rotor interface instead of inside a torque converter. The friction material grabs, releases, and your ears pick up the vibration as noise, the same way your seat picks up the transmission version as a shake. Fixing the friction curve fixes the noise in both cases. That is how directly this kind of chemistry problem behaves, and it is why a fluid chemistry fix can undo a symptom that feels as violent and mechanical as this one does. None of this touches your transmission's hydraulic line pressure or your shift points. It only corrects the friction behavior sitting right at the clutch surface, which is exactly why it works without a single tool ever touching your drivetrain and without a single dollar spent on parts. Now let's tear apart the other option every quick lube counter and dealership service department pushes instead. The $150 full synthetic transmission flush. On paper it sounds responsible. Get all the old fluid out, replace it with premium synthetic, case closed. In reality, a high-pressure flush machine forces fluid through your transmission's internal channels fast enough to rip loose clutch material and varnish that has been sitting undisturbed for years. And that liberated debris does not just vanish. It gets forced deep into the valve body, where it can jam the tiny passages that control your electronic solenoids. Once a solenoid sticks, your computer sees a pressure reading that should not be possible and drops the entire transmission into limp mode to protect itself from further damage. So congratulations, you paid $150 to convert a simple fluid chemistry problem into an electronic and mechanical one, and now that $3,500 rebuild quote suddenly looks a lot more necessary than it ever actually was. Some shops will even see a Shudder complaint come in and reach for the flush machine first, treating it like a routine maintenance upsell instead of recognizing the actual pattern. And once that flush has pushed debris into the valve body, the next technician who looks at the car sees a genuinely more complicated fault than the one that walked in the door, which only reinforces the case for the expensive repair. The paperwork trail at that point makes it look like your transmission was falling apart all along, when the falling apart part only started after the flush. A flush is not inherently evil on a transmission with clean, healthy fluid, but performing a high-pressure flush on a transmission that is already shuddering is like power washing an open wound and hoping it heals faster. Here is the exact protocol, step by step. First, confirm your vehicle actually uses a transmission fluid dipstick. Most trucks, SUVs, and a large share of sedans on the road still do. If yours instead uses a sealed transmission with a fill plug and no dipstick, this specific pour-it-yourself method is not for you, and you will need a shop with a lift. For everyone else, with the engine warm and idling in park, pull the dipstick and locate the funnel opening leading down into the pan. Clip the tip off your $13 tube of concentrated friction modifier and pour it straight down the tube exactly the way you would add a quart of fresh fluid. Before you do, pull the dipstick once and check the fluid on a clean white rag. You are looking for a dark reddish-brown color and a faint burnt smell, which is completely normal for aged fluid and exactly the condition this fix is designed for. If instead you see actual metal flecks or a smell so burnt it is closer to charred, that is a sign of real mechanical wear rather than simple additive depletion, and you should treat that as information rather than a reason to skip the fix, since it is cheap enough to still be worth trying first. Once you have poured the tube in, jot down the date and mileage somewhere, so if the Shudder ever returns months down the road, you will know exactly how many miles that treatment actually lasted you. On transmissions past the 150,000 mile mark with fluid that already looks dark, a second tube added at the same time gives the modifier a stronger concentration to work with. Once it is in, take the car for a real drive, not just around the block. Include some steady highway cruising, so the torque converter actually cycles through its lockup range, and the modifier gets worked evenly through the entire clutch pack. Most people feel a dramatic improvement within that same drive, Some vehicles need another 20 or 30 miles before the shudder fully disappears. Now here is the critical warning. Before you add anything at all, confirm your fluid level was not already overfilled. Adding treatment on top of an overfull system can cause foaming and pressure problems that mimic the very symptoms you are trying to fix. And never, under any circumstance, put a friction modifier like this into a manual transmission or a dry clutch dual clutch transmission. Those systems are engineered around higher static friction because they rely on synchro rings, physically matching gear speeds through friction before a gear can engage cleanly. A friction modifier does the exact opposite of what a synchro needs. Dumping this into a manual gearbox or a dry clutch, DCT will cause the synchro rings to slip under load instead of locking cleanly, and repeated slipping under torque will grind those rings down until the transmission starts flat out rejecting shifts. Sometimes within a single afternoon of driving, what starts as an occasional rough shift can turn into a transmission that refuses to hold second gear at all. And unlike the torque converter fix, this is not something a second tube or a different additive can undo once it has happened. This fix is built specifically for torque converter automatics. Full stop. If your vehicle has a clutch pedal or a factory dry clutch dual clutch setup, walk away from this bottle entirely and look at fluid options actually rated for your transmission type. One honest note before the final comparison. Because this channel does not do miracle claims, this fix resolves shudder caused by degraded fluid and depleted friction additives, which is the cause behind the overwhelming majority of shudder complaints on the road right now. It will not rebuild a torque converter that has genuinely worn through its physical clutch material or suffered real mechanical damage from years of ignored slipping. If you run this exact protocol and the shudder has not improved even slightly after a full tank of mixed driving, that is a real signal you are looking at actual hardware failure rather than a fluid chemistry problem. And no $13 tube on earth fixes worn-out steel and friction material, but for the fluid-related shudder that makes up the vast majority of these complaints, the kind that shows up as a sudden vibration on a transmission that was running fine a few months ago, this is the fix that actually works, and it costs you nothing to try it before you agree to anything more expensive. So here is the entire comparison laid out as plainly as possible. One path costs $3,500, takes your vehicle off the road for days, and exists because a service advisor gets paid more for recommending hardware than for recommending chemistry. The other path costs $13, takes 15 minutes in your own driveway, and has been sitting on a shelf at every parts store in the country this entire time waiting for someone to tell you it exists. Run the math yourself. That is roughly 270 times the cost for the exact same outcome. Smooth, quiet, confident driving with no shudder under load. The only difference is which fix actually gets recommended to you first. And that decision has never been about what your car needs. It has been about what pays the shop more. If your car, your neighbor's car, or your cousin's truck has started shaking or shuddering at highway speed, send them this video before they walk into a shop and get quoted for a rebuild they may never have actually needed. Share it right now, because the only people who lose anything when this gets out are the ones who are counting on you never finding